to be in San Francisco, and most especially happy to talk about National Travel and Tourism Week. If the last 2 years has taught us anything, and it has taught us a lot, the absence of travel and tourism has an incredible impact on local communities. Before the pandemic, 1 in 25 jobs across the United States was somehow hotel related. Unfortunately, a lot of those jobs have been lost. And though we desperately are trying to get people to come back into our industry, it has been a significant challenge that hoteliers across the country face. But we also know that when people travel, they spend a lot of money. For every $100 spent on a hotel, the guest spends $222 on activities in and around the area where they are staying. That economic multiplier creates wealth in those local communities, it creates jobs, it creates a tax base that can do all sorts of wonderful things. And so when we talk about the need to get travel and tourism back to where it was, you can see that the numbers tell you the story of jobs, economic development, and the ability for people to reach the American dream. And so this is really important stuff to get people traveling again. The good news is nationwide, leisure travel is going to be back this year. In fact, we expect leisure travel to be back to 2019 levels across the country by the end of this year. Business travel, still struggling a little bit. It's going to be down by an estimated 22%. Well, unfortunately, here in San Francisco, we'll get into this in just a few minutes, those numbers are significantly worse than what we're seeing across the country. And that's one of the reasons why I think events like this are so important, to talk to people about how important it is for people to come back to San Francisco, whether it's to work, to play, or just enjoy the weekend. And so we'll be talking about that here today. But when you look at these numbers and understand the job implications, San Francisco business travel revenue will be down about 68% this year. Leisure travel revenue will be down about 42% this year compared to 2019 numbers. That equates to $2.4 billion. A lot of jobs attached to those $2.4 billion. So anything that we can do in spreading the message, travel is safe, travel is good, then that's the message we need to be sending to folks, not just here in the Bay Area, but really across the country. There's one other trend that I know we'll talk more about here in just a minute, and that is the idea of leisure travel. And so we think about leisure travel across the country returning to 2019 numbers. In certain regions, it's well above those numbers. But we had a study commissioned recently that suggested that 90% of business travelers now intend to add a leisure day on top of their business travel. So what does that mean? When we see business travel continuing to lag, we're also missing the leisure travel that would have come with it. And so the travel patterns that we've seen over the last probably 12 months across the US are showing us that people are in fact traveling for business and adding a day on the front, a day on the end, maybe even both. And that is a huge economic benefit for our industry. And so we'll get into that in just a few minutes, but I wanted to thank everybody for being here. The fact that you're here shows that you support exactly what we're trying to do. And ultimately, returning business travel and leisure travel to San Francisco is very good for everybody. With that, I want to turn it over to Kelly Powers. She is the director of the Hotel Council of San Francisco, and she will moderate our first panel.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chip. And for our first question here, we have an esteemed panel, and I think it would be nice to just go down quickly and self-introduce. We already met Chip.
Hi there, Rodney Fong, President and CEO of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce.
Hi everybody, my name is Beverage, and I'm the Chief Tourism Officer for the San Francisco Travel Association.
Good afternoon, I'm Kevin Carroll, I'm the President and CEO of the Hotel Council of San Francisco.
Great, so let's get started. Chip, first question for you. From a national perspective, how has travel changed, and specifically, how has the hotel guest stay changed? Any trends that we should be looking out for?
There are trends, good and bad. People are traveling a lot more on weekends than they used to because it is leisure travel now. The business travel, as I indicated a moment ago, is not back. Perfect example, New York City. I was just there a few days ago. Used to be a Tuesday night in Manhattan. It was almost impossible to get a hotel room. Now it's almost impossible to get a hotel room on a Saturday night in Manhattan. So it is definitely changed. The experience, of course, has changed a little bit. You know, I think there was this trend before the pandemic of having smaller rooms and larger common spaces. Well, now everyone wants larger rooms with a desk so that they can do their Zoom calls. We support that. We want all Zoom calls actually to take place in a hotel room. But that is how guests are looking at this differently. The second thing I think is happening and is has changed quite a bit is the food and beverage options at many hotels. There has become an enormous reliance on delivery into the hotel from outside restaurants, and that changes everything from what the revenue stream is for the hotel to the amount of workers that you need, but also changes what the hotel room looks like when a guest leaves. And so there are, as I said, there are trends that are good and trends that are bad, but there are the travel tendencies will be much different in the next few years than what they were prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, and bringing that food into the hotel room also changes some of the restaurant activity out in the community. Kevin, as demand for travel increases, how are local hotels preparing for the influx?
Thank you, Kelly. San Francisco hotels have worked over the last 2 years preparing for the influx that we're starting to see, both from making sure all the cleaning protocols and everything that they've been working on. Right now, what's really been is getting people back to work. And over half of our employees here in San Francisco hotels both live and work in San Francisco. So when we get our employees back to work, we're supporting the local community as well, because they're going out, they're spending within their neighborhoods with here in the city. So I think for us as an industry, getting people back to work and getting the message out that we're ready, we're open, we're seeing more people on the streets. And out here on Union Square, you're hearing French, German, Italian, you're hearing people coming back. And Chip mentioned the different types of travelers that are coming back. So I think what's important for our local hotels is we're starting to get the tourism. It's the business group travel and then business travel, just transient business travel that we're looking for. And I think what Chip mentioned about leisure and people business, if we can get the groups in here and get the self-contained groups in, which our hotels are working really closely on, as well as our partners at Ascent Travel, then we can help the business with people staying and spending more and enjoying San Francisco as well.
Thank you. Rodney, from the chamber perspective and all the diverse businesses that you represent, when you think about the importance of tourism for our local economy, how important is it to reignite travel to San Francisco for your business representatives?
Good question. I think we forget that tourism really expands so far beyond the tourism realm. All those suppliers, vendors, people that are supporting each other within the tourism field, but also the restaurants that employees of this hotel are enjoying across the street. Those are businesses that depend on jobs here in San Francisco in these hotels. So we see it as a huge impact throughout the city. I know the neighborhoods, one of the beautiful things in San Francisco is to explore the neighborhoods of San Francisco. And so when tourists can get out and put their dollars in the Mission or the Richmond District or Ocean Beach, it's really important to spread out that wealth.
That's great. Hubertus, leisure travel is expected to boom this summer. How can cities like San Francisco prepare to welcome back travelers?
Thanks, Mary. Yes, I think one of the key priorities was to really tell the world that the city is open again. San Francisco was was the first major U.S. city to go into a full lockdown in March of 2020. And what we've seen is there was a continued perception that the city was closed or partially closed, and as restrictions were easing and lifted, one of the key priorities was really to tell the world, the city's open for business, people can come visit, and we're ready to welcome visitors again. And I think another piece of that is really the assurance for travelers. What we've seen in research is that consumers, as we probably all do now, really expect to have a full understanding of what's happening during your journey, and that includes all points of your journey. So what is my experience at the airport? What is it on the plane? What happens when I check in? What do hotels do when I arrive? And what are the cleaning protocols and things like that? And what are the local guidelines? I know a lot of that is getting easier and easier, but people still want to understand and know what's going on down on the ground. So we've been really doing a lot of work in that area to get that message out on a continued basis through various channels. That said, though, we also were very keen on inspiring people to travel. Not only did we want to inform people about, the guidelines and the restrictions that may be in place, but we also wanted people to inspire and get excited about San Francisco. So the big piece of that was really work with media around the world, and we have been focused on generating earned media. So we've been hosting press trips pretty much all along now. In fact, Just this past month, we hosted 2 global press trips in partnership with Visit California. We have another one from Mexico coming just this weekend, and then we have 2 influencer trips in the pipeline for later this month, one from Canada, one from the UK, and that really enables us to create that excitement in the marketplaces, generate content and generate earned media so that people really get inspired and consider San Francisco as part of their vacation.
That's great. You guys do a wonderful job there at San Francisco Travel. Chip, next back to you. Can you expand on what you're seeing nationally related to leisure and business travel and some of the reasons to be optimistic for a rebound?
Well, in the short term, people have money, and despite what happened in the stock market today, they still have money. Nobody laughed at that. And many have not been taking those trips, have not been able to see people that they want to see. And so the leisure travel boom is real. I mean, you're going to see it here in San Francisco. I want to reiterate what we just said about the consistency of sending a message to leisure travelers that you're open. It is so critical. Think about your own habits on booking for business and booking for leisure. If I'm booking for business, I have a purpose on why I'm going there for a meeting. And it would be nice to go to a favorite restaurant or to go to a Giants game, but that's not the reason I'm traveling. And so I might still book that even if I don't know whether the local area is going to have mandates or closures or whatever. For leisure travelers, which is the vast majority of travel that we're seeing right now, they're booking and they're saying, I'm going to have an experience, and if I can't have my full experience, or if I believe that I might not have my full experience, then I'm going to choose somewhere else, which is why the consistency of policy is so critical to the leisure traveler, because they want that life experience. San Francisco is a great life experience type to come to, and if the message is being sent, we're open for business, and you can enjoy San Francisco like you used to enjoy San Francisco, they will show up, there's no question about it. The trends that we're seeing, though, is if you are in any place that's warm, near a beach, near a mountain, you're doing great. The Miami numbers, Tampa numbers, Phoenix numbers they're all off the charts, and they've been that way for quite some time.
Do you anticipate that changing at all?
I mean, they'll settle back to normal eventually, but some of the cities that continue to struggle with things out of our control, San Francisco being the perfect one, you don't have the travel from Asia that you normally would have. Policy does play a role here. I mean, we should all in this room urge the federal government to stop the testing mandate. We're one of the last countries on earth that still has the mandate of testing coming into the U.S., even if you're vaccinated. And that's preventing people from traveling because they're like, well, what if I get a false negative? What if something happens and I get stuck? No one wants to do that, so they'll choose to go elsewhere. So we really need to change that. So there are challenges. Every city has their own unique challenges. Washington, D.C. has a serious challenge with the Capitol not being open. I live there half the time. And it prevents lobbyists from coming back. And they're not back. Their clients aren't in town. And when their clients aren't in town, they're not even their fly-ins. And so every city is a little bit unique in that respect. But if you're creating barriers for people to come to your city, you need to do a little reflection and say, what can I do to remove that barrier?
Right, that makes sense. Kevin, what do your members see in terms of opportunities to showcase San Francisco as the go-to destination for meetings and events?
Thank you, Kelly. I think for us, and when Chip mentioned the consistency, the fact for us, our meetings and conventions, what we have the exact same requirements and standards as the whole state of California. And during the pandemic, where we had different rules, and you're talking about expectations of people coming, and then we're trying to understand, well, right now, our city has the exact same requirements as any other city in California, and that's something for us. For meetings and for people coming here, I think for hotels, it's also the events that can come to San Francisco and do. So when the NCAA tournaments were here, it was unbelievable, the crowds that were here in the city. With the Warriors games happening and the Giants, I think what our hotels are doing and have been doing is making sure they know our guests know they're welcome when they come here. We're ready for you. We have events that are happening every day in San Francisco, and that's a reason for people to come here. And if you're coming in for business or a business event, stay for the weekend and go to a Giants game, or stay for the weekend and go somewhere else. And that's what I think the hotels are celebrating. You see it when you're in the hotel lobbies and more people are here. I tell you, when the fans are here and you're seeing fans from around the country, they're going back to their cities and telling them how much fun they had here in San Francisco. And that's something we need. We need more of that with people enjoying and having a great time here, and then spreading the word of mouth, whether they're FaceTiming or sending it out to others. So the hotels are ready, the meetings are starting to come back, the self-contained meetings, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and we also have wonderful concerts like Outside Lands, great
Absolutely.
arts institutions, and
Yeah.
all those other good things that help with the hotel industry.
Exactly.
Rodney, back to you. You referred to hotels as economic engines for local economies, providing a steady flow of patrons for restaurants and retail. Can you expand on the extended economic benefit of filling up our hotels and local lodging with visitors once again?
Yeah, that consistency of a hotel guest, the predictability that we had, to know that this summer is going to be at 85% occupancy, allows retailers to really sort of plan for that. San Francisco has been void of retail. It's been filled in to a great degree on the events that happen in San Francisco and the arts and culture. But that is so important for us from a real estate perspective, creating perspective, tax collection perspective. So we need that. That's about 1/3 of our economy in San Francisco tourism sector. So yeah, I would like to piggyback though on Kevin's thoughts, about what are we going to do differently. A lot of us took for granted the great things that happened in San Francisco, the arts, the culture. We took a parade, an annual parade for granted. These are things that don't happen elsewhere. These are things that make San Francisco special, and I think we have to dig a little bit deeper to celebrate them, to put them out in front, and have the consistency that almost every weekend there's going to be something. You just happen to bop in town and hang out for the extra couple of days, that there's something to do. So all of that adds to the economic engine.
Yeah, and it makes us very unique in that respect. I agree. Hubertus, how has the travel experience in San Francisco changed since the pandemic began?
So I think if you look at San Francisco as sort of the iconic San Francisco, it has not changed. The icons are still here and you can still experience the city. So as I mentioned earlier, of course, there have been different ways of how people travel and expect to travel and kind of what they expect on the ground, but we're also focusing on all the positive aspects that we're seeing now. And one big thing I think is the outdoor dining scene, which is really vibrant now, and it's kind of a result almost of this pandemic through legislation that the city was able to put in place. So I think we're putting a lot of focus on these topics that really resonate well with business around the world. So I think the outdoor dining scene, and I think Chip, you mentioned it earlier, what we've also seen over the last couple of years is that destinations, whether it's rural destinations or more the resort type destinations, specifically in California, have had record years, whereas urban destinations such as ourselves have seen dramatic declines because people were gravitating towards outdoor spaces and kind of open spaces. So I think that also gives us an opportunity to sort of celebrate the outdoors that we have in the city. There's new things that are coming online, the Presidio Tunnel Tops this summer, or Francisco Park that just opened this past weekend. So I think there's a lot of good messages that we can push out that really resonate well. And I also wanted to, and I think it was also Chip who brought it up earlier, and I should have mentioned that, but part of our recovery effort is also to really bring back the international leisure visitor, and that's really critically important, again, in that context of bringing them back to an urban destination. Pre-pandemic, anywhere between 20 and 25% of our overnight visitors came from international markets, but they accounted for more than 60% of the spend, and that is not surprising because they tend to stay longer and also spend more money while they're there. That was really a critical part of our strategy as well. How can we get the international visitors back? And we're seeing some good results or some good trends for this summer, and I think again, these messages around dining and outdoor experience are specifically really resonating well with the international markets as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to follow up on that, when Mayor Bree came back from her second trip, just the last trip to Europe, she told an audience of business people that the European countries that she visited, the most exciting thing they wanted to see was our outdoor parklets. And that was very exciting to her to hear that from the country representatives that she visited with. That was what they were most excited about coming back to. I find that interesting.
We were actually the first city to be in Europe at that time, and I think that was really good. And to have the ambassador, Mayor Bree, with us, which was really really, really good to have. And hopefully, again, that was during a time when, you know, Europeans make their plans for the summer. So I'm sure that we'll see some good results this summer.
Great. Well, that concludes this panel here, and we will have a second one on hotel industry trends. So thank you very much for listening to this, and we'll just do a quick transfer over.